Hello and welcome to today's Speakeasy. We're going to take a look at a film called The Future Is Ours. It's a documentary that's one of the 2024 official selection films of the American Inside Free Speech Film Festival. Now, they survived COVID in grade school. They've been doing active shooter drills since the time they started school. They're dealing with the climate change challenges, with a myriad of bloody wars around the world. And for some, this will mark the first year they're about to be able to vote. They're called Generation Z. And the filmmakers found Gen Z journalists around the country to reflect on how they feel about the world they're about to inherit. And I think you may be a little bit surprised at who these young folks actually are. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Terrifying developments in the Middle East.
27th school shooting to happen so far this year.
The 25th straight day of temperatures hitting at least 110 degrees.
Climate change, political polarization, gun violence, social media pressure, depressive and anxiety symptoms in young people doubled during the pandemic.
We're just kind of going off the rails right now.
You never know when something bad is going to happen. It's kind of an unfair plate we've been served.
New warnings about the global threat of climate change.
A powerful hurricane making landfall around 7:45 a.m.
It is, in some ways, apocalyptic.
Look at this. We still are taking on water.
We always say recycle, pick up trash, do this and that, but what else can we do?
Nobody's listening to us. The world is literally and figuratively on fire.
Science tells us there's a connection between hurricanes and climate change.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's I don't think it's anything that we need to worry about. I think it's in God's hand.
I'm thrilled to be here with the film's director, Ed Madison. Hi, Ed, and thanks again for being here, and congratulations on a terrific film.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So good to see you.
You too.
So we spoke a bit earlier, and I'd love for you to share with everybody how this came about. You were in Washington, D.C., mentoring some students, and
Yes, I wear a couple of hats. In addition to being a journalism professor at University of Oregon, I'm also the executive director of the Journalistic Learning Initiative, and we do a lot of work with students. And we were doing a mentorship project where we took students from two high schools in Washington, D.C., got them press credentials to cover the 60th anniversary of Dr. King's March on Washington. And so I got to spend time with these students, and as I mentioned to you, it was really special for me because half of them were from the school that I had attended and done my first bit of journalism. But in chatting with them, I realized that with this particular generation, there's so many misnomers. You know, we think, oh, they're just spending their time on TikTok, or they're not really engaged with issues. And I found that not to be true. And so after talking with them, the idea organically kind of came about as to, talking with them about a lot of other issues. So including, gun violence and reproductive rights and climate change and teen mental health and all of that. And so that became the basis for this project, which expanded and allowed us to go to other parts of the country and talk to other young journalists.
that's amazing. And it's interesting that you talk about the misnomers, because what I discovered in watching this is that these young people are very smart, they're eloquent, they understand, well, they're trying to understand the world, they understand a lot about themselves and revealed a lot about themselves. And it was absolutely fascinating for me to see it. So one of the things you bring up, gun violence, that to me, this generation of people, their entire lives have been spent doing active shooter drills. And you have kind of an interesting observation of that happened one time when you were visiting in school, if you can tell us about that.
Yes, yeah, no, I was visiting the school for some of our nonprofit work, and at one point the lights dimmed, the bell rang, the teacher walked to the door and locked it, and all the kids got in the corner and were, on their knees, and I thought to myself, wow, how often do they do this? Now, of course, I mean, in our generation, I think they had sort of duck and cover drills because we thought the bomb was H bomb or whatever was coming. So, but I don't remember it being that frequently and also that pervasive. I mean, I think that the sense that we hear about, active shooters and shootings at schools almost sometimes twice monthly, that I think it could potentially be triggering for kids to really, I mean, I think our central nervous system doesn't necessarily know always the difference between a simulation and the real thing. And so I started looking at some research about that, and I do think it's something we may need to revisit. I mean, I certainly understand the desire to, prepare young people for the worst, but I don't know to what extent is that helpful. So yes, I do have some thoughts about that.
Right, that's fascinating, actually, because I don't think I've heard that really be investigated in that
Yes.
way.
Mhm.
Wow. So it's fascinating. So you started doing the interviews with the students you were with in Washington, and then one of the places you visited is Rockford, Illinois. Tell us about that school and why that school was such a perfect place for you to do this project.
Well, Rockford is about a hour, 90-minute drive, I think, from Chicago. It is, I think we would consider it a purple state, and purple area of the state of Illinois, in the sense that a good half of uh, the students at this particular high school are come from conservative families and that ideology, and others from a more progressive political perspective. And so it was really wonderful to be with these kids who are, studying media and its impact, and they're doing, student newscasts and sportscasts and things like that, but also realize that they don't necessarily have opportunities to sit down with one another and chat about the things they agree about and the things that they disagree about. Also, that they are quite astute in realizing that, just political discourse in this country over the last, let's say, decade or so has really gotten into, name calling and all kinds of things that don't necessarily allow for us to have what we consider the democratic process of just being civil about how we engage with one another. So they were terrific, and we had certain students that were from a conservative perspective, and we wanted that represented, and we gave them the latitude and freedom to speak about their views, and I think it gives a nice sense of overall perspectives. I think whatever you believe in or think, you can find it in this documentary. Whether you wherever you weigh in on, reproductive rights or, gun hunting and gun ownership or all that, it's all represented there.
Yeah, that's true. The one blonde young man who I believe he's from Rockford.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And he even referred to the fact that, he hadn't really expressed these opinions before.
These views are very suppressed. Like, this is actually the first time I've ever documented these kind of views, or really expressed them in school.
So that was a fabulous opportunity for him. So when you approach, let's say, that school, did you have to do some finessing and some massaging to get the buy-in? And how did that work?
I have a colleague, a longtime colleague who's from that community, who also taught at Palo Alto High School, which is where a lot of our journalistic learning initiatives primary work began. And she knew a teacher there who she thought would be open and interested in this project. And so, no, I come from the orientation around journalism that I'm never trying to do gotcha or embarrass or whatever else. And so, and I think hopefully I come across sincere in that way. So we didn't encounter any pushback. There was openness, and with each of the young people, when we sort of treaded into areas that were somewhat sensitive, I would say to them, "Now, are you okay, with sharing this. And they also made sure that they saw it before anybody else did. So that everyone who was in the documentary saw it before we generally released it to the public, because I didn't want anyone to feel like they were misrepresented. And especially when you're interviewing people one-on-one, and then they sort of see how they're juxtaposed with what other people are saying. I do believe in terms of sort of journalistic integrity. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a license to allow people to edit the work for us or suggest edits, but I do want to make sure that we're fair. So.
Yeah, because they opened up, boy, were they high revealers. They
Yes.
were really, they were
Yeah.
really open. The other thing I loved was that they weren't strident. I mean, the
No.
world around them is strident, but
Yeah.
they were able to talk about things that are, very important and complicated issues. But there was no stridency, which I thought was just remarkable.
Yeah, and you also probably picked up on just this through line of mental health.
Sometimes I would just break down and cry, and it wasn't for any specific reason, but it was just, I'm tired.
Everybody's trying to figure out who they are. Even if they're like, oh, I already know who I am, like I know what I want to do. It's like, everybody knows that they don't.
Gen Z is, sometimes we joke about it a lot, but it's something that we talk about regularly, like mental health, and so I think maybe it's more evident now, but I think that's just because we're talking about it.
It's one of the things we're doing as an organization is we have a podcast series that we are doing where we're talking to superintendents all over the country. And the number one issue that comes up is how do we support our young people with these mental health challenges, just the additional staffing that it takes, but also just the care and and just being there to support them. So yes.
How surprised were you at their take on social media? Because the premise is, oh, they're just doing TikTok all day. These kids are completely unengaged. They have skepticism about
Yeah, I
stuff.
think the honeymoon is over on a lot of the just sort of the era of just posting.
I think a lot of it is unfortunately social media and like just the effect of how addicted we can become to that. And you look at TikTok and Instagram, it's like you post things that you think people are going to care about.
There comes a time you start to think about, well, wait a minute. Why am I sharing these pictures from my vacation? What is that statement? Am I trying to say, hey, look at me, I'm having a great time and you're not? I mean, what's the point? And I think for younger people that are still, developmentally just trying to figure out who they are, the idea of the public shaming and the, all of the issues that come along. I mean, for example, Snapchat, which came along when my sons are in middle school, this whole idea that you could put anything out there and it would disappear, well, what kind of behavior does that invite, and believe me, I learned. So yeah, I think it's technology, now we're all talking about AI, and that's a whole nother topic, but it's it's interesting. But I was really, yes, it's very impressive the fact that they're starting to do things like make choices about putting their phones on do not disturb and setting boundaries around how they engage with peers on social media and taking timeouts and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So. The other thing that's hard to overestimate is the impact that COVID had, in particular on this age, because they survived it in grade school, and that was a tough time for them. And I think you would know better than I, but I'm sure they're still struggling in college.
Yes. And yes.
That was the tough part, is trying to keep myself focused through COVID.
COVID was definitely mentally draining, which I feel like a lot of people don't understand.
I'm an avid athlete, so not being able to go out and play the sports that I love to do was kind of rough on my mental health. Kind of put me in a dark place.
there's a question as to whether or not this generation will be stigmatized by employers as not having had the same sort of rigorous expectations in school that their predecessors did. There's another question about whether or not we have been able, are we returning to the level of expectations, or have we modified? Are we, dare I say, like even coddling students in ways that aren't helpful for them to be resilient and to know how to, face the challenges that come with life, So we'll see how that all shakes out. But yes, I mean, COVID has left its mark in more ways than one, particularly on youth.
Yeah. One of the issues that I found them to be very eloquent on was the whole LGBTQ.
I'm queer. All of my friends are. It's the high school I go to, very large gay population. So I've just, grown up in such a bubble surrounded by that stuff. Has never seemed like in any way absurd or unusual to me.
What some people are going through in those kind of situations, like for example, transgenders, I don't believe that is something a mentally sane person can go through, to think that you are another gender. Like, that is just not true.
If you believe in your religion that that's what God said, then, I mean, go ahead. But once again, it shouldn't govern what other people can do or cannot do. I feel like it's none of your business.
How did you go about framing that with them so that it would be, you got what you got?
Well, again, my approach isn't to try to frame it so much. I try to ask questions that are going to elicit a authentic and honest answer, and then I am sometimes mindful of that when I'm talking to other subsequent students. Oh, this person said this, and I won't call them out by name, but I say, well, what do you think about this perspective? So if somebody has a perspective that, I don't know, having safety officers or just armed resource officers, I guess they call them in the schools, is not a good idea. What do you think of that? And so they would say what they would say. So that's kind of how I approach that.
Yeah, it was very effective. And that leads me into, after you made the film and screened it, the reaction's been quite positive, but people would say, oh, it's fantastic, but wouldn't it be nice to have a bunch of these students in a room together?
Yes, exactly.
And you did that.
Yeah, so we returned to Rockford a couple months later, and we got about 10 or 12 of the students in Rockford together, and we looked at various issues. And the thing that kept coming up was this sense of common ground. And so we actually turned that into a project, the Common Ground Project, because we thought, well, these young people did such a great job of engaging in some very challenging conversations. Couldn't that be a model for other schools and other students? And so that's yet another one of our projects that we're doing. But I think it was wonderful to see that sense of dialogue and to see them walk away with the realization of what hopefully we all realize, that we're going to agree on some things and disagree on others, but at the end of the day, most of us have the best intentions for the public good. So.
And you also have a study guide
Yes.
to go along. Talk about that, because that's a great resource for schools.
Yeah, so on our website, journalisticlearning.org, if you click on where it says the future is now, the documentary, below that, so you can watch the documentary there, but you can also access study materials. And they're really intended as discussion prompts, but also potentially some writing assignments to have students reflect on some of these issues. You know, it's funny, in that gathering where we went back to Rockford and we talked to some of the students, there was one young man there who said, he says, I'm going to be honest with you. He says, I don't really follow politics. I don't know what's going on, you know, as much as I probably should. But if my friend Ian says to me, hey, you know, you should pay attention to this, or you should vote or be engaged, that's going to mean more to me potentially than my father saying that to me, because he's a peer, he's someone who understands me, and I'm going to pay attention to that.
So, as someone that doesn't know much about politics, something that I would probably want someone to do for me so I could get into it was probably like push the idea towards me, like Ian was saying. Like if you're just like, oh, hey Z, by the way, you can vote. I'm not gonna listen. Like it's just like you're just making a joke at that point. But if someone like Ian comes up to me and is like, hey Z, by the way, you should probably do some research so you can vote and figure out what's going on, I'd be like more into it and do more research just because someone I trust has come to me with something that important that would deal with like the future of our country.
And so I think that that speaks to just just the power of friendship at that age, you know, and how they make sense of the world. So
Yeah, I love that that young man when he said that in the follow-up.
yes, yeah.
The other thing that was so interesting to me, two students came from families where Republican and Democratic parents, and I thought, wow, so they have learned from jump how to live, you know, and
Yes, they have two of the students have one parent that's a Democrat and the other parent who's Republican. Isn't that something?
I mean, I know personally I was raised, both my parents have near opposite political beliefs, so having to, you know, live with both of them and, you know, always being open to discuss anything with them, that I think granted me the ability to be able to just listen, and I'm very grateful for being raised like that.
Like, I'm open to talk about anything because I'm the same way. Like, my dad's like pretty Republican, my mom's a Democrat, and like me being in the middle, I share views from both sides. I'm not afraid to talk about anything. And it's like when my issue comes when you just try and shove that view down my throat and like you're not willing to listen to my thoughts about it.
And what we heard from them is that their parents model you know, the ability to converse and engage with one another in a respectful way, even though they may not view some of these issues in the same way. And what a wonderful thing that is, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you see what it produces in their children, right? Their ability to empathize and understand perspectives that they may not necessarily agree with. They're the level of tolerance, the level of civility, you know, is so impressive, you know.
It is. You know, it's interesting in the beginning of the film, the sort of montage at the top, they feel like they've been dealt a kind of a tough card here in this life. But you get the feeling from all of them, even the one who isn't so engaged but wants to be, that they feel like they can make a difference, they want to make a difference, and they will make a difference.
Yes, and isn't that hopeful for, you know, I mean, we as a, you know, an older generation have left them with a lot to deal with, you know. You know, we were talking about, for example, issues like gun violence. I mean, I can't imagine, you know, what it must be like to be concerned about going into a mall or you know, being in even in the hallway in school and all those kinds of things. It's just that issue in and of itself must bear so much mental burden on young people, you know.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, they sort of occupy war zones because when there's a shooting, you've been in a war zone, and there's a fair amount of PTSD, I think, that
Right.
young folks are
Yes.
carrying around with them.
Yeah.
What was the thing that surprised you the most when you were finished talking to all the young people?
I think it's the thing that you said surprised you. I mean, just the eloquence, the how well versed they were on, and how and their ability to articulate their thoughts in such how do I want to say it, like professional. They're like they're emerging young professionals. Um, and I think that's great. It's funny because I've often made the connection that I think that journalism and education are to some degree suffering from some of the same plights, and you understand this as a journalist, and that has to do with the public perception of the roles of each of these professions in our world, right? We don't compensate teachers, nor do we compensate journalists in the same way that we compensate investment bankers. We don't, but we also have some odd sense of just those roles and what those people do. And it's not to suggest, particularly in journalism, that journalism shouldn't own some of its own, um, you know, problems.
Right.
Yeah, there's been, I mean, there was a time, not to get too deep in this, but I've written about it before, where there was kind of a system where journalists would come to a city and they were there for a year to make their way to the next market. So in terms of their investment in that community, it was sometimes shallow, and that doesn't make for building trust and relationship and all that, as opposed to people who've been somewhere for a long time.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, wow. So I hope that the election gives them a way to keep to their beliefs in wanting to have civil discourse. But I think they're prepared. I think what you and they went through together will hopefully help them get through, which, depending on which way it goes, some people will be happy, some people won't. There clearly will be a fair number of people not happy, but I think you've given them the tools to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other reason I felt that this was an important project to do and an important project to do at this time, because these young people are, most of them, eligible to vote for the first time. And so not only are they, as student journalists, sort of interpreters of what's going on in the world for their generation, but they also have to exercise their citizenry duty, is going to be happening shortly.
Ah. And my one last question, do you think that they learned something that made them believe even more in journalism by going through the process of being the subject of a journalistic piece?
Yeah, so the Journalism Education Association, which is the predominant you know group for journalism educators, but also students, they have two conferences a year, and each conference has about 500 student journalists attend. So we did a session at one of their conferences where we brought in the students from Rockford via Zoom, because it was really difficult to, try to fly them in and all of that. And, you know, if you're 16, 17, 18 years old and you realize that, you can have an impact on, an audience of people, that's a pretty powerful thing to realize, So definitely, I think they felt, in one sense, a sense of responsibility, but also a sense of pride, that their school was and acknowledged, and that their peers had an opportunity to share their perspective, and that perhaps that made some other young people reconsider or think about their perspectives on certain things.
Mhm. Well, we'll be looking for them in the future as the interpreters for us of the world. Congratulations, Ed, and thanks
Thank
again
you.
for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.